The topic for this week's tip of the week is something that I'm doing in a project, and I was reminded this might be a useful thing to know. It's a way of doing a tubular tubular cast on using Judy's Magic cast on. And I've used this before on several projects, and what prompts it is that I'm using a very, very small lightweight yarn and using size 0 needles. And when you're using needles that size, it can be a bit of a thrash trying to use a typical tubular cast on technique. This one is much, much, much easier. And to do this, I use, instead of just one needle as I would for the Magic cast on if I were doing socks, I use 2 needles. And if you don't know how to do this cast on, I've done a video on it earlier and you can check it. Now, one reason I like this method for the tubular cast on is that most tubular cast on techniques are going to require that you cast on an even number of stitches. With this one, you can have an uneven number of stitches, doesn't matter. And you cast on half the number of stitches on each needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if you want an uneven, just one more stitch on that one, and I'm going to do an uneven number just to give it a try. Now, if I'm using this for cast on, what I want to do is and one reason why I'm using different colored needles is I want to work these stitches in one circular needle, these stitches in the other, and if you don't, you kind of can wind up with you can mix up your needles and there you are. It's a pain in the butt to do. So let's go here, and I'm going to work these stitches with this needle. And what you want to do is you want to work 2 rows, or 2 rounds actually, okay? And so far this is just like any of Judy's Magic cast on. Just use the same technique. And in my blog itself, I will show you the cast on for the project that I've used, and you can see that it's very superior. Now, often when you're using a tubular cast on, they will tell you to work the stitches in a smaller needle because they get kind of stretched out. That is not necessary with this method. In fact, you may want to use a slightly larger needle because it is a very tight tubular cast on. Get that off. Now, the ways that you can do tubular cast on, there are a variety of techniques. The most common one is one with a crocheted edging where you pick up, crochet chain where you pick up the stitches. And I've used that one frequently and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I kind of like this one because a tubular cast on is basically just double knitting. And here I go. This is my last round. I did 2 rounds. And so I've got this thing right here. Now, if I were doing the toe, I would be working this on a sock. I would continue to work in the round. But since I am going to be doing a tubular cast on, I am not going to do that. Now, if you're working with an uneven number of stitches, as I am on that back needle, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to probably work that back stitch first. Now in this case I just pick one of my needles, doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to purl this stitch on the back needle. And again, if I were doing this with an even number, I'd probably work the stitch on my front needle first, doesn't really matter. And I am going to then knit this stitch from the front needle. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm getting all of the stitches on one needle. Purl the stitch from the back, knit the stitch from the front, And as with most tubular casts on, they look better if you work them with a knit purl ribbing rather than a knit 2 purl 2. What I always do is after the first row where I've done knit 1 purl 1, then I change it over to a knit 2 purl 2 by using a cable needle or working stitches out of order. Knit, and here's my last stitch. Now you can see that I have an uneven number of stitches on here, and I might decide that I want this one to be my right side. Drop this needle now, and I've got a little slightly oversized stitch there, and I can neaten that up when I'm done. But my tubular cast on at this point is finished. And I just merrily go on my way. Now you can see that, let me get this row done. You can see that it is a very tight tubular cast on and that it's very even. That stitch is a little nasty looking, but I could go in and clean it up. And all in all, I like this method quite a bit. As I said, if you're using very small needles, it is, and a very lightweight yarn, it is much, much easier to do it this way.